procedural question. Oh, I'm sorry. My clock is off. My computer clock says it's 5:17 in the evening. So we will call this to order the Washington County Land Use and Planning Committee. Roll call Supervisors Gallant, Schulteis, Boltman, and Krebs are here. Mr. Strupp is not here tonight. Would you please stand and we'll rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I want you to know that the agenda for this evening's meeting was posted with the county clerk on the 6th day of October. Notice was sent to the West Bend Daily News, Express News, WIBD, WMBZ Radio, WTKM Radio, My Community Now, Hartford Times Press, Kewaskum Statesman, and the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. We have one action item in front of us tonight, and that is a grant application. The Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation Workforce Innovation Grant Program. We'll entertain a motion to approve the resolution for this grant application so we can bring it to the floor for discussion. Ms. Schulteis says moves on that. We need to have a second. Mr. Gallant seconds. With that, comments and discussion. Ms. Silsky, please. No.
I don't know who was all had the opportunity to attend the housing event on October 7th, but Deb Silsky has been promoted to be the county's new community development director. It's really exciting. She's been with the county for a long time and brings a tremendous amount of experience to our team. And the first thing she's going to do is work to get the residents of Washington County another $10 million. So she's going to talk to us about that. But I just wanted to point that out that congratulate her formally for that appointment. So congratulations, Deb.
Congratulations, Deb. Now get us the $10 million.
Okay, I will do my best. So the resolution that was provided in your packets is for a grant application through WEDC Innovation Grant for $10 million. It's really funding for looking at solving the greatest workforce challenges that a community has. And in Washington County, that challenge is workforce housing. And for those of you that was at the October 7th event, we did talk a lot about the next generation housing program and what those barriers are, and the fact that we're going to create a coalition of local governments to look at the barriers, strategize solutions, and come up with innovative ways to help resolve and break through those barriers. And as part of that process, it's applying for this $10 million to help fund some of those solutions that will come forward. In the original resolution that was provided to you in the packet, we had earmarked the $10 million for a revolving loan fund, housing revolving loan fund. When this resolution, this is a very fast-paced program. The grant is due in less than 2 weeks. When we were writing this resolution, that was the direction we were going to go. Based on some feedback that we've gotten and talking internally, we believe that we should allow and have the coalition drive the process. So the local governments, the economic development corporations, chambers of commerce working together, just like we do in the Brownfields Coalition, do the same with the Housing Coalition, really understand what those barriers are and come up with innovative solutions. And then look at how are we going to fund those solutions. And if we get the $10 million grant, that would go towards funding those solutions. And we do have some ideas on how those could be spent, but it's really getting the coalition to drive that process. And so I looked back at the resolution and wanted to make those adjustments, and I've handed that out to you. Make that adjustment. So the bulk of the resolution is really just talking about applying for the grant and authorizing the Housing Revolving Loan Fund, the Housing Endowment Fund. Those solutions, they may come up at a later time, and I may bring those back for authorization from the county board, from this committee and the county board. But at this point in time, we really wanted to focus on the coalition working through that process. So this resolution that I handed out is really just focusing on applying for that grant. The other thing that I handed out is the Next Generation Housing Coalition spreadsheet. And this infographic, we actually have added a component to this. It's a workforce education and connection component, which is working with the businesses and working with those individuals that will be joining our workforce and connecting them to that next generation housing, which is what we want to achieve. So do you have any questions?
Mr. Krebs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We just were handed this amended document, so could we take a 5-minute break to actually read this before we discuss it? Thank you.
All right, everybody take some time and look at this. Yes, it's just brand new to us, so thank you, Deb, for the time. It's kind of, we got a unique group here on our committee itself, and we have two people involved with lending and one involved with construction and contracting. Questions that any of the three of you might have, particularly involving this process? Mr. Gallantz.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the resolution, let me back up. Based upon the changes and focusing specifically on Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation Innovative Grant Program, is it required on page 2 of 3, line 20, where it speaks to EWC and the Next Generation Housing Committee? Just seems like if we've removed reference to the loan, revolving loan, shouldn't we remove reference to the housing generation, Next Generation Housing Committee? Or is that needed for the application?
I wouldn't say that a coalition is required. It's recommended. Intergovernmental cooperation, regional cooperation, and coalitions are highly recommended as part of the grant. But it's really the fact that we have a successful model in the Brownfields Coalition, and it has worked so well in terms of intergovernmental cooperation that we want to use that successful model to succeed at Next Generation Housing.
So I guess my question is, I know this is to get the grant, the go ahead for the grant, and will it come back as far as, will we have a chance to have a say in how the money gets distributed? Or is that just strictly left up to the Next Generation Housing? I mean, I guess my, to maybe make it more clear, like, is it how do you qualify? Who qualifies what, is there certain lenders or how does that work?
Yeah, those are great questions. Thanks for asking them. And thanks to Supervisor Krebs for making that point about getting this today. I think one of the things that you got to keep in mind as you contemplate this resolution, we don't normally do this deal where there's edits of this variety in this quantity in front of you before asking you to approve something. So thank you for taking the time to actually study it. Because the answers to your question, Supervisor Bowman, are important ones. And they are both reflective of, this is a very entrepreneurial approach to governing. We wouldn't generally do this, but we're on strict timelines. So I would expect definitely that we'll be coming back to this committee, not necessarily for approvals, but giving you updates on, here's what we're thinking, here's where the committee's taking the dollars and cents. If we were to get a $10 million state grant, it would be under the auspices of what the committee is going to do. But I think there's going to be regular communication with this committee, not only for the grant, but if we use any of our American Recovery Plan Act dollars, it'll be this committee who's contemplating how that works. We're talking about anything and everything, including things like revolving loan funds and special assessment fees and down payment programs. So I think the challenge that we're facing with giving this to you today is we're trying to apply for a grant and build the airplane at the same time while we're flying it. So I expect you'll be hearing a lot from us, probably. I don't want to go so far as to say monthly you'll be hearing it, but certainly on a quarterly basis, you can expect there's going to be updates, not just on what did we get with the grant, but also what are we working on with the ARPA dollars that we received as a county, and that'll be continual, because we don't want to create a space where there's winners and losers, whether it's builders or developers or mortgage companies. We want to hit that niche market space that's getting missed and do it in such a way that it helps fill the gap, and then we get the heck out of the way and hopefully don't have to fill that gap again. So that's a long way of saying we'll be back.
And based on the decision of this committee tonight, it will go to the full board later this evening. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Other comments or questions? Mr. Gallantz?
When do you anticipate bringing back the resolution to create the revolving loan fund and the housing endowment fund?
Yeah. Well, those, since those, the revolving loan fund wouldn't be funded through the $10 million grant, the intent is that we would like to start this process and form this coalition regardless of whether we get this grant or not. And then we'll start the process, and we would want to work with the coalition and really understand what those barriers are and work with the experts in those areas, the lenders and the developers and the builders, truly understand, what are the barriers, and then come up with solutions before we would come to the county board with a request to authorize anything like a revolving loan fund or an endowment fund. So, I mean, that process alone, if the coalition meets monthly, I mean, that's still going to be probably a 6 to 8 month process would be what I would anticipate.
Yeah, because I'm sure how many have seen the state of Wisconsin is looking at legislation to support some of what we're just talking about right now. So you talk about flying an airplane or building an airplane while we're flying it. I guess more is to come. I have a number of questions that were going to be related to the revolving loan fund, but since that's stricken, then I will reserve those for that later time. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good spot to interject that what this reflects is a discussion that we had in the last 24 hours, and that is we don't want to tell $10 million grant to be the tail wagging the dog of the bigger project. We want to build the project, and if the grant comes, great, and if it doesn't come, we just need to build smart solutions that achieve the goals that I just laid out a moment ago, where government can, as Craig Sadonico said in his video, if you were at or you listened to the presentation last Thursday, excuse me, government can make good projects great. They can't make bad projects good. So we want to try to live up to that. And I think that's where you kind of get a governmenty non-answer of, I don't know, 6 to 8 months, because we're trying to figure out how do we find good projects and make them great rather than just trying to throw money at a problem. So it's going to take us a little while to do that the right way.
Mr. Krebs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, flying the plane while building it, or the cart before the horse. Honestly, it all feels the same at this point. I was at the presentation, was it last week? And now we're voting on it already. One of my questions related to this resolution is what are we doing, or what's the purpose of it? Is it to form the next generation housing committee, or is it to quickly apply for this Wisconsin grant related to it? I understand there's a deadline associated with the grant. What do we even know what that is, or what is the deadline of
So
it?
the deadline is the 25th of October, so less than 2 weeks.
Okay,
And the intent is that the county board would authorize the housing coalition to happen, regardless of whether we get the grant or not.
okay, because so once the coalition's formed, on the bottom of page 2, how I'm reading it, we have to then figure out what the purpose of this coalition is, or I actually put the details to the purpose.
Yep.
Between understanding the barriers, strategizing the solutions, and then implementing the solutions. I guess depending on what some of the barriers and solutions are identified as, really, I think that gives me a reservation of wanting to implement them right away until we really know what direction it might head. So I would hope that this would come back to the board, and it would, if we would be committing any dollars to it.
So in particular, if we do that, if there's specific programs that we apply for with American Recovery Plan Act dollars that the county has, it will come back to this committee. With the grant programs, it'll come back to this committee, but I wouldn't say there is an approval process at that point. It's more along the lines of, let's have a discussion. What are you comfortable with and what are you not? Which really is the point of the next generation housing committee as well, is we know that no matter what happens, this is government acting in clearly the private sector space. But my feeling is that's because there's some reason that the private sector is not covering this. And if you talk to builders and developers, they'll tell you why. But so the question then becomes, what are we able and willing to do? What are we comfortable, able and willing to do in a conservative county like Washington County? And that's what we'll be coming back to this committee and saying, okay, this is what the committee came up with. Do you have wild objections to using state grant dollars for this? And then subsequently, what about the American Recovery Plan Act dollars that are the counties? So all of those discussions and decision points will be back here at this committee.
Okay. I having just quickly read this and made a lot of notes quickly on this. One other comment I'll provide to it is, we talk about grant money, we talk about ARPA money. I didn't see anything in here about money or buy-ins from the businesses in these communities that I've been told are also promoting and pushing this. The builders and the developers are always the ones that are said to make the most money on housing projects, but this is also how much money will the businesses and industries in this community make. They definitely need to have a seat at the table and a buy-in on it too.
So I'm sorry, did I take?
No.
Oh, okay. On page 2, what was line 9, we started to try and get into that with the original resolution. What you need to understand about the amendments, and I'm sure Deb went into this a moment ago, but to be clear, we want to make sure that we're as qualifying as possible for a $10 million grant. I'm not certain that having that in there, our feeling is, particularly on the revolving loan fund side, having that in there is going to help us get the grant. And therefore, if we use American Recovery Plan Act dollars that are county specific, that for sure will be part of the solution. And I have told some businesses that I've talked to that's exactly what we're going to ask for. For example, I publicly said, stop giving $5,000 signing bonuses for staying 6 months, and instead help them create a savings account or put a down payment on a house or whatever the solution is. So I'm in complete agreement, and that will be one of the things that we talk about.
And I understand this resolution's geared towards a grant at this point, but this is more, I'm putting it out there at least before I forget to say it, more towards when the housing committee actually starts to strategize, create these solutions and stuff, that they're making sure that there's other entities that need to be a part of it. It related directly to the grant. If we were to receive it, is there any matching dollars towards it, or what other kind of strings might be attached to it?
Yeah, there's no matching dollars required. They do talk about in-kind hours. So for our coalition members, we are asking that as part of their letter of commitment that they do commit to in-kind hours, which is very similar to what we do with our EPA grants for that coalition.
Okay, I think that's kind of what I have for now for questions and comments. I'll support advancing it. Doesn't no harm in applying for the grant. As the coalition forms, and if the grant money comes in, obviously there's a lot more discussion that needs to happen with it. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Gallows, go ahead, please.
On page 1, line 19 through 22, to your point that was made, this resolution also authorizes the creation of the Community Development Department. So has there been any changes to that structure that we had previously seen? Because I haven't seen anything in this packet nor in the packet in the next 15 minutes. So I'm assuming that structure is remaining the same.
That's correct. Structure is the same. It'll be formally approved through the budget process technically, but it's the same as what you've seen, what we've talked about in the past.
Thank you. That's all.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I see this as really 2 projects running parallel at the same time. Eventually, they're going to merge together. And this is part of one of the projects on that parallel path, which is to apply for the $10 million grant. The coalition is a different matter that's going to come up, but that's going to be a different discussion. But we've got to get this train going down the track first, and then we can talk about the other. Actually, they got to be happening at the same time with a common goal at the end.
Yeah, it's kind of like building that, keep using the analogy of building the plane while flying. One is one wing, one is the other wing. It's pretty hard to fly without either one. So I knew basically from the beginning when designing this conceptually that $20 million was probably where we needed to go. And that was largely predicated on work we've already done in the past with the revolving loan fund and EDWC. It made sense to me that that was going to be close to what we needed. Turns out that was very close. This gives us an opportunity to go to the state to get the other half rather than relying on a general fund transfer or some other mechanism or slowly building over time the way we did with the revolving loan fund. So yes, and I would say is the answer. The other thing to keep in mind, and we had this debate while we were drafting this resolution, which you can see is almost literally happening in real time. The committee very well could be a task force established by the county executive. It's in this resolution because it's one more indicator of we've got a coalition, including support from the county board saying, we want to do this thing and we want to pull all the municipalities in and get all the letters of intent. So we feel like the bigger we can make the coalition saying we're in, the better off we are. So to get directly back to your question, they're running on parallel tracks and two wings on the same plane, whatever analogy you want to use. This is all very integrated. And it very well could be one-time money, especially from the state of Wisconsin. We're expecting it's going to be a one-time shot and we're done. And that's partially due to the American Recovery Plan Act, the way that it's written, the way that the state's administering it. So we're trying to be vague to give ourselves as much flexibility as possible. So when we're coming back, we're saying, okay, this qualifies under the American Recovery Plan Act, and it aligns with what we think the community, the county is comfortable with. Here's where we're going to go. And that's changing in real time.
Yeah, the rule is actually an interim rule, so
Yeah.
it will change.
Yeah, Treasury literally sent it out and calls it an interim final. We'll
Okay.
leave it to the federal government.
Well, thanks both of you. I'm sure this will get a lot more discussion when we got 21 other voices in this room later tonight. So at this point in time, we have a motion and a second to authorize the county staff to apply for Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation Workforce Innovation Grant. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? All right, the resolution is passed. At this point in time, our next meeting will be a special meeting and it's set for 4:30 PM on October 20th, a joint meeting with Executive Committee. That'll be 1 week from today. The meeting after that will be at 7:30 AM on Thursday, October 28th. I will not be present, but Mr. Gallantz has been asked and he will be chairing that discussion. We are adjourned. Thank you.